and welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swail. Today, welcome to the show, Kelsey Streufert. Ms. Streufert is a licensed attorney and Texas Capitol veteran, serving as the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association, or the TRA. The TRA represents the state's $70 billion food service industry with more than 50,000 locations and 1.4 million jobs across Texas. Kelsey, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Brad.
It's a pleasure to speak with you. I love getting to do this. I say this all the time, and I hope the listeners believe me when I say it because it's true. I love doing this. I love talking to people about this sort of stuff. So I gave a pretty brief description there. Do you want to give us some more background?
Sure. So interestingly, I joined the TRA just over 5 years ago. There was this thing called the COVID-19 pandemic that had just started to take hold in China.
COVID-19?
Yeah,
okay.
I know.
It rings a bell.
So I accepted the job when that was happening in China. You saw it on the news. By the time I started, restaurants were prohibited from being open. We were in full lockdown mode, and we were trying to figure out how to live in this new environment. So it's been quite an interesting 5 years. Really proud of what we've accomplished at the Texas Capitol. But it's been a bit of a roller coaster for our industry, to say the least. Yeah,
I guess I hadn't planned on asking you about this, but you brought it up. So just real briefly, I mean, I remember I was born and raised in Austin, and of course, all the restaurants closing. And there was just a running list of like local established restaurants that closed permanently because of that. I mean, is the industry... Certainly, new players have come in. Mm-hmm. The restaurants still exist, but has the industry fully recovered from that?
I don't know that there is such a thing as full recovery from that. So if you look at the data, we're bigger than ever. We actually rebounded in terms of jobs and sales and all of those metrics, probably faster than any other state. We partnered with Governor Abbott to get restaurants reopened safely, very quickly.
Yeah.
We worked with the legislature on a host of bills. You might remember that little thing called Alcohol to Go. It's my dad's proudest accomplishment, I think, that his daughter has come up with to date. So we had a great reopening in that sense, but it's been 5 years of extreme pivots ever since, right? Because we went straight from COVID to supply chain disruptions, inflation, tariffs, immigration, tax changes. It's just been nonstop. So the industry is bigger than ever. We're actually the state's largest private sector employer. But it's tough out there for restaurants, most of whom are small businesses.
Yeah, you knock that first domino and then there's 20 other dominoes down the line. And of course, you know, those well-established restaurants, whether it's Austin or wherever else, those are closed and you don't ever really recover from that. A new player may come in and that's great, but you know, you're never going to get that, that whatever hometown restaurant that closed. Yeah. So in this past legislative session in the 89th, I think they're about to close out the second special session. There were some successes for the Texas Restaurant Association, specifically Senate Bill 1008, which, if I'm understanding it correctly, sort of streamlined the regulations across the states. Is that right?
That's right. It really was about 8 different bills in one, things that we've been working on for a very long time. Senator Middleton, Representative Cody Harris really championed this bill for us. And just to kind of set the stage of why we needed this bill, there are about 200 different health departments across the state of Texas. So where your restaurant is located determines which one of those 200 regulators you get to deal with. And of course, if you have multiple restaurant locations, you could be operating with dozens or even hundreds of those different health departments. They all do things slightly differently. They all require slightly different permits, fees, have different inspection protocols. The list goes on and on. And so we said, you know, we're too far gone to sort of throw out that whole system, but can we bring some guardrails? Can we bring some standardization? Can we get rid of, frankly, some of the fees and permits that are being added onto these small businesses so that they can spend less time in the government bureaucracy and more time and money reinvesting in their business? Yeah,
I can imagine, you know, I guess I'm trying to think of a Texas-based food chain that had locations and all over the place. The first thing that comes to mind is Whataburger.
Yep.
I can imagine for them, it's probably a bureaucratic nightmare for Corpus Christi to Austin to Dallas or whatever, the different locations requiring different things. and streamlining it makes their processes just a lot better, I assume.
That's exactly right. Streamlining and just bringing some transparency to it. I mean, you think about some of these smaller communities, they might not even have a website with frequent updates for folks. And so even just something as simple as trying to figure out what are the permits I need to apply for to open a location here can be really challenging. And so part of the bill actually requires these local health departments to share more information with the state, the Texas Department of State Health Services. They've got a website where they're going to post all these different fee schedules, local ordinances. So it's sort of one clearinghouse where we can keep up with all the local rules and we can help our members keep up with them as well.
So the local entities, local jurisdictions can still allow, there still may be some differences between Corpus and Austin, let's say, but the state is saying you can't go past this limit.
Yeah. So, for example, one provision of the bill essentially had fee caps. So if you're in certain parts of the state, then the state is basically your regulator of last resort. And so DSHS is your health department. So they have a whole set of permits and fees that are already established for restaurants in their territory. And so what we said is if you're a local government, you can set your fees however you like, but they're subject to these caps of what DSHS would charge a restaurant in their territory. So it allows for customization. Locals can charge less than that. They can charge based on different parameters. So for example, DSHS' fee chart is based on gross sales, so how much sales a restaurant has. Some health departments do it by employee counts or other factors. That's fine, but we know you're going to have this hard limit, this hard cap, so that everywhere across the state we have some predictability in our business planning.
Yeah. So, I can imagine that this is not, the Whataburgers, obviously, it's very clear how that's beneficial for a Whataburger or a Papacitos or Papado, whatever. I can think of a million different chains. Not trying to advertise for anybody, just those are the big ones. But if there's a restaurant that's just in Austin, a local restaurant, first one that comes to mind, like a Bill's Oyster, great restaurant, whatever. How does this help them?
Few things. One, and Austin actually, believe it or not, is one of the better local regulators. So
interesting.
Let's use a Houston one, for example. In Houston, they were charging some different permit fees that are now illegal under the bill. So to give an example, everyone knows the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission is who you go to get your permit to sell alcohol in the state of Texas. Local governments in the past were allowed to also charge you a local alcohol fee, even though they don't regulate alcohol. So a small business in the city of Houston would have to pay the city for their food license. Then they'd have to pay TABC for their alcohol permit. Then they'd have to turn around and pay the city of Houston again for an alcohol fee and add a bunch of other fees on top of it.
Sure.
So we cut a lot of that out and said that's ridiculous. The state regulates alcohol, pay them, you're done.
Yeah.
So that's an example. Similar thing for the actual food managers who work in restaurants. So we said if you are a state certified food manager, you've already paid the state, you've gotten your certificate, you shouldn't also have to turn around and pay the local government for a local food handler card. Believe it or not, Houston, many others were doing that. You mentioned I'm a lawyer. I kind of compare it to that all the time, right? I pay the State Bar of Texas every year for my dues. That allows me to practice law all across the state. I don't have to also pay the city of Austin for the privilege of working.
Yeah, I guess we're in the case, the alcohol example for the city of Houston, it just sounds sort of like a shakedown. You want to do business in our town, you got to pay us.
Yeah.
And that, it didn't, if there was no additional regulation on top of it I don't know, like I could make something up. The city of Houston only allows, a certain proof of alcohol. Right. Maybe something like that, it would make sense if they had an additional regulation or an additional license, but that wasn't the case.
Right.
So what were they? It was literally just, here, pay us some money.
Yeah. It's a historic, relic in the code, for lack of a better word. And really what we've seen over the past few years is some, not all, some cities have really looked at business fees as a way to raise revenue, especially as the legislature has reined in local property tax levying.
Yep.
And so they're looking for revenue. Fees is one of those places that the legislature really hasn't put a lot of guardrails in place. And so we're seeing more and more fees get stacked on these small businesses. Some of the examples that our members brought to the legislature for SB 1008 were things like outdoor heaters. We've all gone to restaurants, seen the little, propane tank with the little heater. Well, in the city of Houston, they were charging hundreds of dollars for each one of those propane tanks to be permitted for like 6 months in the year. Yeah, ridiculous.
I'm trying to even think about why you would need a permit for that, but I get it. Okay.
Yep. Candle permits is another one of my favorites. So if you had any actual candles on your table at a restaurant in one of our major cities, they were charging a candle permit. The list goes on and on, right? And I call it permit stacking.
Sure.
It's like you would think getting a restaurant permit would entitle you to do all of the normal business activities of a restaurant. But we're finding more and more these sort of add-ons that it's sort of death by a thousand cuts, right? You're a small business, you're running on thin margins, and all of a sudden there's all these surprise fees here and there.
What is the purpose of a candle permit? What are you I don't know. I have a driver's license. I'm proving that I can drive. Right. I guess a permit is similar. Is it accurate to think of a permit similar to a license? I mean, I'm paying for the right to have this candle on this table at my restaurant. What am I paying for?
That's a great question.
I mean, am I showing them that I'm safe with fire? Does it go towards the local fire department in case there is a fire from the candle? Like there's more fires because of I'm just curious.
I think
maybe there's no real answer.
I think we've drifted away from the concept of a permit being, like you said, sort of a license and a way for the regulation to actually have enforcement behind it, right? It really should not be a revenue raising tool, right? That's what taxes are for, sales taxes, et cetera. And so I think with this bill, we really saw the legislature, and by the way, bipartisan support, not just Republicans, right?
Yeah.
Democrats too, saying enough is enough. We're getting a little carried away. Let's rein this in. You mentioned like the candle permits, for example. Some of that is coming from the fire marshal and the fire departments.
Yeah.
But again, that's on top of, anytime these buildings are constructed, they have to get building permits. There's commercial sprinklers that are required and inspected, right? So what is that not doing that we need to stack on yet another permit?
Yeah, of course. On the food manager standard, so the food manager gets a certificate and it's valid everywhere in Texas. Before this bill, again, is there any proof that before this, a food manager in Houston couldn't do the job in Fort Worth?
No.
Like, is there something special about these different were they requiring more? You had to be a sommelier or something like that in one place to get a food manager certificate?
So some of the cities will tell you, because they do have the ability to have more stringent health standards in our major cities. So some of them would create additional requirements and sort of have that be the justification for a local food handler card. I just have a hard time sort of stomaching that, because the reality is safe food handling preparation techniques. I mean, that's what that certification is about, right? Is preventing foodborne illness, making sure food's cooked to the right temperature, preserved correctly. Those are scientific sort of benchmarks that don't respect local government boundaries, right?
Sure.
The way to prevent salmonella is the same in Dallas as it is in El Paso.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think that's where we wanted to be reasonable, but we wanted to just sort of say we need some standardization here. And again, just as a lawyer can practice in El Paso or Austin with one license, we think the same should apply to our food handlers too, or food managers.
Yeah, I think so long as the chicken is cooked to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit, we're good.
That's very specific.
No matter where we are.
I can't say I brought that degree.
I think it's 160.
You heard it here, folks.
I think so. This is not a cooking podcast. But there were some other bills also that y'all helped get across the finish line, if not championed, and a couple of them were around childcare.
That's right.
Childcare Resource Hub, SB 1265, Childcare Scholarships, SB 462, and that's not. I don't recall seeing anything in there that was specific to restaurants necessarily. So I'm curious why is that important to Texas Restaurant Association and its members?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a evolution for us.
Okay.
We saw childcare as one of many ways that we could attack the workforce shortage that our members are facing all across the state. Before the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic, we do not have enough people working in restaurants to really keep up with the demand. And that's after wages have increased about 30% since the pandemic. So we know we've got a deficit here. Childcare is one of the biggest barriers to employment in any industry, but especially our industry, because we're not 9 to 5. Most positions you can't work from home, right? There's just a lot of additional factors that make it harder for you to be in our industry and taking care of young kids. Plus, when you look at the demographics of our industry, we tend younger, we tend more female. So you think about people who are sort of in their child rearing years and have all of these challenges when it comes to childcare. So 60% of non-working parents say childcare is a top reason they're not in the workforce.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time in the business community sort of fighting to poach each other's employees. We talk about upskilling, reskilling, all of those great things. Childcare is one of the few ways we can actually grow the pie so that there's more for everyone, right? Instead of fighting over slices of the pie. So that's kind of how we got involved. So we first got involved in the 2023 legislative session, saw very quickly that the conversation around childcare was really being led more from the health perspective, the education perspective, women's issues perspective. We really weren't hearing businesses talk about this as a workforce development issue. So we got together with Texas Association of Business, a group called Early Matters, and Texas 2036. We created the Employers for Childcare Task Force before last session. And then we spent all of 2024 really developing some policy ideas and brought those to the Capitol for this most recent legislative session.
Yeah, I can imagine. I did work at Starbucks in college, but I didn't have a kid. But yeah, that's certainly a good point that there's, you work evenings a lot. That's when you probably make the most tips in the evenings, I would imagine.
In most places, for sure.
Yeah, so getting help with childcare is certainly important. There's also truth in labeling, which does it only apply to shrimp?
It does.
So there's people out there that are trying to say that this is Gulf shrimp, but it's not Gulf shrimp.
There's some of that. This bill really came from the shrimpers. Their industry is really struggling right now.
The shrimp industry in Texas?
The shrimp industry in Texas.
That's interesting.
Like many small businesses, everything costs more.
Sure.
The margins are smaller. I absolutely empathize for them because it's a very similar story to what I hear from my members, frankly.
Yeah.
So they came to the legislature with that concern. And originally the proposal said it required a bunch of different sort of government mandates, things like you need to post a sign at your door if you're serving imported shrimp.
Okay.
Or you need to change your menu to say where your shrimp is coming from. Good intention, sounds simple. The reality of our supply chains today is restaurants often don't know where their shrimp is going to come from one day to the next, right? There's a season for Gulf Coast shrimp. You can't get it year round. So there's all these factors that sort of complicate what seemed like a simple idea. And so we worked with the legislature. We said, let's have a truth in labeling law. So restaurants shouldn't be able to mislead anyone, mislabel anything. But if we're taking that step further of sort of a proactive mandate about how we're marketing, what we're saying, that's where we have a concern. So we worked with Senator Middleton and others to get that compromise bill. It was something that we did not have an objection to. And so that took effect September 1.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I would want to know where my shrimp's coming from. I think. I feel like if it's coming from overseas, how fresh is that shrimp?
Yeah.
So that's good to know. I want to ask more on the broad scale of things, how the restaurant industry in Texas is going. There's a lot happening on a national scale that I'm sure, can't possibly imagine it not, but I'm sure is affecting restaurants here in Texas. The current administration, the Trump administration, obviously cracking down on immigration a lot of deportations, limiting new visas, limiting illegal immigration, everything like that. How is that affecting the restaurant association or the restaurants in Texas?
Yeah, it's an issue we're talking about more and more. What we're seeing in Texas is not a ton of raids at restaurants or that kind of thing, but there's a lot of fear amongst the community, right? Anytime a raid happens anywhere in the country, it's shared on social media, it's shared on the news. And so that's scaring a lot of people, quite frankly, from coming to work and also just from coming out and eating at our restaurants. We're actually seeing sales and traffic take a dip, especially in heavily Hispanic communities across Texas. So it is a cause of concern for us. We are actually very optimistic, might be a slightly strong word. We're very encouraged by the fact that President Trump himself has said over 6 times that we need temporary work permits for the food sector in particular.
Yeah.
We wholeheartedly agree. It's actually an incredibly popular proposal. We just did some polling with ABIC, the American Business Immigration Coalition, found that I believe it was 89% of Texas GOP voters agreed with the president's position on that issue. So we think that there's reason for hope because for the first time really ever, we've got a secure border, which obviously was part of the president's campaign message, right? Yeah. Secure the border, but also secure the economy and lower prices for consumers. Now we think it's time to kind of turn to that piece of the promise and address it with temporary work permits.
So, just has there been any thought or study done on what would happen if the temporary work permits don't go through and the immigration and deportations and self-deportations, all that stuff, does happen? Like, what does that look like? What does that landscape look like for Texas restaurants?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. So we work with a group called Forward.us. They just published a study called the Prices Report. They found that if we stick to our current immigration policy trajectory, the average American family is going to be spending over $2,000 more a year on basics like food and other basic goods. So we know sort of the path we're on. We've seen food prices skyrocket in the past few years. They're about 35% higher than they were during the pandemic. So there's a reason that President Trump talked about lowering grocery prices, right, when he campaigned. And we can draw a direct kind of causation line from our immigrant workforce and these prices. And it's not just restaurants, right? But it's our farms, it's our ranches, meat processing plants, the distributors. Every segment of our food pipeline is understaffed.
Yeah.
And we need that kind of temporary immigrant labor to really close the gap.
Another big part of the national story is tariffs. Mm-hmm. And even before tariffs, there was a lot of inflation going on. People, yep. I know my grocery bill has gone up. I can't imagine that a restaurant's grocery bill didn't go up. It does seem like prices are a little bit higher, and I'm not putting any blame on anybody. If prices go up, you got to raise. If costs go up, you got to raise your prices. I understand that. How are restaurants dealing with that? Are they still reeling from the inflation? And how are they looking at the tariffs?
Yeah, it's a real struggle.
Sure.
The National Restaurant Association did a pretty good breakdown of the profit margins and how much things have gone up. So the average restaurant's making about 5% profit pre-tax. So that's a pretty narrow window to operate. Yeah. And when you're talking about food prices have increased 35%, wages over 30%, credit card processing fees have doubled in the past decade, rent, utilities, right? You name it. They're all up by double digits. And so that 5% is not going to sustain you unless you raise prices.
Yeah.
So we are seeing menu price increases. They are behind food price increases. So if food prices have risen about 35%, overall you're looking at menu prices have increased about 30%. Yeah. So not fully making up the gap, but at least trying to sort of survive. The challenge is people are only going to pay so much for a hamburger, right? No matter what it costs that restaurant to make, there's a point at which consumers tap out and say, I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so you're really seeing restaurants flirt with that line and try to figure out where can I put my pricing so that I can survive and not turn off the customers that I need.
Yeah, on a mom and pop burger stand may not have gone through the analysis of what that price is, but I'm sure that the McDonald's or the Whataburgers or whatever have done that. Here's the maximum price we can charge on a hamburger and still sell it. And anything above that, we're going to start losing people. And that's a challenge, I'm sure, for everybody to sort of figure what I got to go over this to stay afloat, but I can't because people stop coming. On a more local level, as far as costs going up, property taxes have got to be an issue for, not only for all businesses and homeowners and renters, everybody, but certainly restaurants.
Yep.
Especially you're talking about that very small 5% window. Property taxes go up. Who cares about inflation? I still have to raise my prices.
Yep. No, that's absolutely right. We were sort of a leading voice in telling the legislature, thank you for focusing on property tax relief. Please don't solely focus on homesteads, right? Yeah. Because it's sort of not a pendulum, I guess a scale. And if you take all the pressure off one side, where's that tax burden going to shift? It's going to shift to the commercial side, the renters, everyone else who owns property in the state of Texas. We talk about Texas, the Texas miracle, Texas being a low tax state. It's not really true when you're talking about businesses. We're sort of in the middle of the pack when it comes to how high our tax burden is for businesses. And property taxes are a big part of that. So we've been grateful that in 2023 and 2025, there was a focus on sort of paying down the property tax rate, which does benefit everyone, including commercial properties. Also very, very grateful that this session they passed the proposal to increase the exemption for the personal property tax. So that's how we're taxed on inventory, equipment, all of those types of things. So certainly some very real progress that we want to acknowledge in that space, but still work to go for sure.
Yeah. So, I know that, I can speak very at length about what's happening in Austin, I'm sure. And I know that Harris County and Houston and other places are doing it too. But, they're going to that maximum rate increase every single year. Austin is talking about a tax rate election to go above and beyond that. And I think the total percent is something like 24% above what it was. And I just can't help but imagine or worry what that sort of does year over year to restaurants.
Yeah.
And then the downstream effect of, okay, well, now maybe the inflation has sort of come down, but now we have this property tax increase. We're going to have to really look at that line of how much we can charge for a hamburger.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, especially because commercial properties don't have the same protections when it comes to appraisal increases.
Yeah.
So you're really seeing, especially in cities like Austin and Houston, people are truly being squeezed out of their commercial property, especially in those high growth areas, because you're valued sort of based on your land and what that could be.
Yeah.
So you think about a little hamburger hut. Well, that land can be 10 times as valuable as the restaurant, right? And so that appraisal just keeps going up and up and up. And even when the legislature buys down the rates, at some point you're priced out just purely based on the appraisal.
Yeah. So, all of this is all of this to say is that it doesn't, the inflation and the tariffs and the immigration and the property taxes, it's great that there's an awesome win for the regulatory. SB 1008 makes doing business easier for sure. What comes next for the restaurant industry here in Texas with all these other factors that are making it more difficult to do business?
Yeah. So, I can't help but laugh as we talk about this. It's sort of like you'd have to be crazy to want to run a restaurant, right? When you hear about all these different challenges. And yet we have more restaurants today than last year, and we'll have more next year, right? So Texas's growth is our biggest asset and our biggest challenge in a lot of ways. The environment is relatively good, probably the best in the country. We work really hard at the Capitol to keep it that way.
Yeah.
But there are challenges ahead. So things that we're focused on, credit card swipe fees. We mentioned it a little bit. That is a really skyrocketing cost for businesses.
You said it doubled in the past 10 years?
I think that's right. Doubled in the past 10 years. And they have no control over that expense, really, right?
Yep.
So I go into a restaurant, I use my credit card to purchase that hamburger. Chances are very high it's going to be a Visa or a MasterCard. They control over 75% of the entire U.S. credit card market.
Yeah.
They set all the fees. They set all the terms. Hut's Hamburgers has no ability to negotiate with Visa and MasterCard about what those fees should be.
Sure.
Even Whataburger doesn't really have any negotiating power with Visa and MasterCard, right? So that's an issue that we would really like the legislature to look at, is how can we bring competitive free market principles into that space? Because it's an inflation multiplier, right? The small businesses are paying those fees, but they have to get factored into what consumers are ultimately paying for every good and service, even if you're not using a credit card, right? Because that becomes a cost of doing business that these small businesses are absorbing and having to calculate into their business model.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought about it before, but it must be true that even Whataburger can't really do anything about it, because what are they going to stop? They can't stop taking Visa.
Yeah, it's about 90% of their business is credit cards, basically.
Yeah, so that's got to be that's a challenge for sure. But on the is there something that y'all will be working on, like on the interim? Like, what are y'all's goals in the interim before the 90th Texas legislature? I've heard talk about fixing the property taxes. I know that Governor Abbott talked about it at a State of address. Setting certain caps, like, I don't know, 2/3 of the population has to vote for any increase, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that ever going to happen? I don't know, but there's certainly serious talk about it.
Yep.
And I do. The homeowners are sort of what always gets the focus, because that's where a lot of people's wealth is. Well, they do vote, yes, but the business side of it doesn't get talked about a lot. And I'm just wondering, what are the ideas for, what could be done for businesses as far as the property taxes go?
I think
the local entities, they're going to the maximum, it seems like, every chance they get.
Right. I do think we need to focus more on the appraisal process, especially on the commercial side, and some of those sort of escalating provisions, right? I mean, again, if your rate stays flat, which to your point, it's not staying flat, because every large community is going to an election to increase it to the max. But even if it stayed flat, if your appraisal is increasing 100% each year, you're done. So I think we need to look at that, especially for sort of local businesses. I think about all the local businesses around the Capitol, Texas Chili Parlor, just all those iconic places that their land is so valuable. We gotta look at how we protect that. We gotta continue to do compression. That's one of the simplest ways to really help everyone. So those are a couple things. And then we have to keep looking at this fee issue too. If you address taxes, but you leave local governments free to set any fees that they want, they're just going to move, rob Peter to pay Paul. So we need to look at that as well.
Yeah, they'll find their money one way or the other.
Yes.
For sure.
And I should say, we partner with a lot of local governments across the state. There are a lot of great actors. There are a lot of them that have fees way less than the state.
Sure.
So it's certainly not an across-the-board local governments are the problem. It's really that inconsistency that's the problem. It's how can we create more predictability, more transparency? Yeah,
predictability is, if you don't run a business, it's hard to really value that until you start doing it, and then you realize, okay, this is super important.
Well, and for us coming in to this session, right, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've had 5 years of just roller coaster chaos, no predictability. So we said, what are the areas that we can bring some control, some predictability to? I can't control tariffs at the Texas Capitol. I can't control supply chain disruptions.
Sure.
I can do something about what government's charging and what those fees are, right? So that's really where we said, any place we can add some predictability, let's try to do that this session.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on y'all's wins. Kelsey Streufert, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we sign off?
I think we hit a lot of it. It's really, again, I just have to emphasize Texas is the best state to operate a restaurant. It is
You could have stopped at the best state.
Also that, the best state to live, to eat, to run a restaurant. We want to keep it that way, and there's always room for improvement. So we're going to keep at it. Is there a website or social media you wanted to plug? Sure. All our social media is at TX Restaurants, and then www.txrestaurant.org is where you can find us online. Well, Kelsey Streufert, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.